signs of hope. After weeks of tension, there are promising developments between Russia and Ukraine. We're at the White House. Budget brinksmanship. Republicans seek important assurances as a critical deadline looms. Good report card. Catholic school enrollment makes a comeback. And papal visit. A preview of the Holy Father's trip later this month to one of Italy's most historic cities. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, February 15th, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. Developing now, hope that Russia is retreating from the brink of war. Russian President Vladimir Putin now seems willing to talk, and President Joe Biden says he remains open to high-level diplomacy after warning earlier that Russia could invade Ukraine any day. White House correspondent Owen Jensen joins us now via Skype. Owen.
Tracy, good evening to you. Good evening, everyone. Yes, we are joining you via Skype tonight because this afternoon, this has never happened before, at least since I've been reporting here, the power went out on the North Lawn. Now, just a short while ago, President Joe Biden did speak to the nation today about the situation in Ukraine. And he said, and I'm looking at my notes here, President Biden said today we should give diplomacy a chance to succeed. And he warned if Russia attacks, the human cost for Ukraine, he said, will be immense.
As long as there is hope of diplomatic resolution that prevents the use of force and avoids incredible human suffering that would follow, we will pursue it.
After weeks of worry over war, will conflict be averted? Russia claims it never wanted the battle and blames the West for stoking fears. In Moscow today, Russian President Vladimir Putin held a news conference along with Germany's new Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. Putin saying Moscow is ready for talks with the United States and NATO to discuss things like missile deployment limits. Earlier, Russia announced that some units would begin returning to their bases. Chancellor Scholz called news of the troop withdrawal a good signal. Still, there are more than 130,000 Russian troops near Ukraine. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson warned Russia is sending mixed signals.
We've got Russian field hospitals being constructed near the border.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says Russia still has time to step back from the brink of war.
There are signs from Moscow that diplomacy should continue. This gives grounds for cautious optimism. But so far, we have not seen any sign of de-escalation on the ground.
The head of NATO says they're ready to discuss issues like arms control to lessen the tension. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden speaking today to leaders from counties around the U.S. who are gathered in Washington, D.C. to talk legislation, money, and rebuilding their communities. Billions of federal dollars coming their way.
Well, I wanted to make sure the money goes directly to the counties. Directly to the counties. No, really.
And President Biden also said in his speech earlier that if Russia attacks Ukraine, it will be met with, quote, overwhelming international condemnation. At the White House, where the power remains out on the North Lawn. Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Okay, thank you, Owen. Well, the U.S. Senate has its hands full this week, including keeping the government funded. Meanwhile, tensions continue to rise over Russian actions toward Ukraine. There is bipartisan agreement that Russia will pay heavily if it invades.
What the Biden administration is doing is pretty exceptional. I mean, this set of transatlantic and global sanctions that is being readied against Russia is going to be without precedent in world history, and it is going to deal a significant blow to the Russian economy.
They say they have a message for Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Millions of people are at risk. He's trying to hold them hostage to negotiate with NATO. That has to stop, and he needs to recognize if he moves forward in Ukraine, he's going to feel the consequences probably sooner than he thinks.
Meanwhile, Republicans are holding up extending government funding due to run out on Friday. Senator Marsha Blackburn wants answers from the Biden administration about a $30 million federal grant program for smoking kits possibly involving crack pipes. The senator writes it would be absolutely absurd to send government-funded drug paraphernalia to underserved communities. U.S. taxpayer dollars should not be used to fund vending machines for crack pipes. Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville tells EWTN News Nightly Congress has to find middle ground for spending taxpayer dollars.
We've got to get the government funded. We can't, that's what we're here for. But we got to come to some compromise of, I guess, where the money's spent and how we spend it. Again, it's not our money. It's the people out there working for a living's money.
Other Republicans say they won't support a short-term government funding bill unless they get a vote on stripping out the administration's vaccine mandate for military, medical workers, and federal employees. And joining me now is Mike Baker, former CIA Covert Operations Officer and CEO of the global intelligence firm Portman Square Group. Mike, welcome back. Always great to see you. As we heard from Owen earlier, Russia claims that it's removing troops from the Ukraine border, but NATO says it hasn't seen any evidence of that. I want to get your thoughts. I mean, what do you think is really going on here, Mike?
Well, I think Putin is still leveraging sort of what the situation amounts to is he's got 129,000 troops on the border. If we were going to, take him at his word that he's moving troops off that border, well, fine. But we would verify it through overhead imagery and other means. And we're not seeing that right now. So we're not seeing anything to back up this idea that somehow the Russian military is de-escalating the situation or drawing down on its troop levels along the Ukraine border. And so, I think Putin still is negotiating in a sense. He's at the poker table. He hasn't played all his cards. And, if he starts that withdrawal process in any significant way, he's given up this leverage, right? And so, then the impetus for the West to sit down and whether it's arms discussions or any other concession that Putin may be looking for that could be considered, he's losing that leverage. So I don't see that happening until he gets something in his mind that's concrete.
Yeah, President Biden spoke this afternoon about the situation in Ukraine, saying in part the U.S. would impose long-term consequences. That's if Russia invades. Do you think that's enough of a deterrence for Putin?
Well, look, I mean, I've been of the mind ever since this kicked off that his intention has never really been to engage in a sort of a full-scale military further incursion into the Ukraine. My feeling has been that he's looking for certain wins here continue using that analogy at the card table, and he would not be actually going forward with the military incursion. The Biden administration's daily effort to kind of hype this up in a way, right? Jake Sullivan every day saying, well, the invasion is imminent. It could happen in the next couple of days. And then he kind of speaks out of the other side of his mouth and said, or it could be a couple of weeks. And then he goes out of and he says, or maybe diplomacy is going to work. I don't necessarily understand where the administration, where their head is with this messaging that they've been engaged in, right? And the better action would basically be to deregulate, their energy policy, drive the price of oil down from where it currently sits at $93, $94 a barrel, get it back down to where it was not that long ago in that $30, $40 range. And that's something Putin would understand, right? And then engage in this effort to make the sanctions. But don't, this idea that every day we're saying, oh, that invasion, that could be imminent. I just don't understand the strategy.
Yeah, and there were talks about cyber attacks. We know that there was a cyber attack in Ukraine today. I want to get your thoughts on that. And do you think that that's something that could happen here in the U.S. or other European nations?
Absolutely, yes. To answer your question, it's a very important point that you're raising here. Look, Russia has a playbook already. They've gamed all this out. The Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians to some degree, they've been probing and testing infrastructure in the U.S. and in the West for years now, and that's everything from the power grids to banking systems, water treatment facilities, military and government installations. They've been mapping this out, probing and testing for years. So they've already got a playbook. If they decide to go that route, they open it up and they just start. right? So it's not something that isn't inconceivable. We know that's where the next major conflict is in part going to play out, is cyberspace.
And Mike, we have probably less than a minute left or so, but I'm wondering what most concerns you about this whole situation that's unfolding right now.
Well, look, Putin's always been clear about what he wants, and he wants this buffer zone. He wants territory. And obviously he doesn't want Ukraine in NATO, but I don't think he's ever imagined that, somehow NATO is going to accept the Ukraine, because it's fraught with problems. So I think we need to understand that he is slowly, in his own way, accomplishing his tasks. We need to get serious about how to push back in a meaningful way. This idea that if he pulls his troops off, suddenly it's all good, that's not the case. He's going to continue by proxy or by direct efforts to rebuild in some fashion the former Soviet Union. And I think one of the other things that he considers a win so far is his effort to show cracks within NATO. So we have to take this more seriously, I guess, going forward. And I worry that if this does de-escalate, somehow the Biden administration is going to imagine, look, we got a diplomatic win, yay for us, that's good for the upcoming election, and now we can go on to something else.
Yeah, I guess only time will tell. We'll continue to follow this. Of course, we know you will too. Mike, thanks so much for your time. I always appreciate your analysis.
Sure, thank you.
Our former President Donald Trump has criticized the Biden administration over its handling of North Korea. The former president suggested a recent increase in missile tests by the North would have not happened if he were still in office. Trump urged North Korea not to endanger diplomatic advances made during 3 meetings with Kim Jong-un. The 45th president made his remarks Sunday in a video message to a forum in Seoul, South Korea, which was attended by former Vice President Mike Pence. A Catholic bishop in Sri Lanka has intervened to oppose the arrest of an activist critical of the government's investigation into the deadly Easter Sunday bombings of 2019. Those multiple bombings killed at least 260 people. Today, a court in Colombo released Shihan Malaka on bail after Cardinal Malcolm Ranjith spoke out on his behalf. In France, a trial has begun for the alleged accomplices to the murder of a Catholic priest 5 years ago in Normandy. Father Jacques Hamel was killed by 2 attackers during Mass in July 2016. The 2 were shot by police while fleeing the scene. The 3 men who are now in court face conspiracy charges. A 4th is believed dead but remains on trial in absence. Meanwhile, Father Hamel's cause for sainthood is currently open. Coming up, analysis on the rise of legislation regarding transgender issues. Lawmakers are taking a stand against sexual material being taught to children in school without their parents' knowledge or consent. The Parental Rights in Education bill aims to bring transparency when discussions regarding sexual orientation or gender identity occur in the classroom. And joining me now is Jay Richards, Senior Research Fellow for the Heritage Foundation's DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society. Jay, welcome back. Always so good to see you. Talk to us more about this bill and why it was put forth in the first place.
Well, it's unfortunate that a bill like this is even necessary, but Florida, like many places in the country, unfortunately, are dealing with an onslaught of what we could just call gender ideology. So this idea that biological sex of male and female, that's not a real thing. What we actually have is this kind of internal subjective idea of gender identity, and this is getting earlier and earlier in the curriculum, so that even kindergarten students now, unfortunately, very often introduced to these explicitly sexual topics. Florida took a stand on this, and I think they're exactly right. They basically said, we're going to side with the parents on this. So we're not going to ban particular topics, but we are going to insist that in elementary school, so K through 3rd grade, that schools be transparent so that teachers and parents are on the same page and parents know what teachers are talking about. And then also just prohibiting the introduction of these explicitly sexual things to our youngest school children. I think this is really just common sense.
Yeah, Jay, I want to go back to that. What would be the rationale for talking to students as young as 5 about sexual orientation and gender and talk about the danger in doing so?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, the claim on the other side is that this is actually what kids need, and not raising these questions is actually harmful because there are going to be kids who are struggling with their gender identity. But if you actually look at the details, if you look at so-called social transition, in which, say, a school will take a boy and use a female pronoun or something like that, that has very severe psychological effects. And then imagine if you get them on the track using puberty blocking hormones or cross-sex hormones a little later. Those have very severe psychological and physical effects on their heart, on their fertility, on bone density. They're real physical harms that result from this. And so I think there's absolute medical reasons, frankly, why schools would not want to be introducing this. Unfortunately, they've worked their way into our school system. They've worked their way into our teachers' colleges, so that we've got this ideology, frankly, infiltrating the public school system. And finally, we have a state, or at least some state lawmakers, that are willing to sort of realign things in favor of parental transparency and well-being of children.
And you know, one thing I want to talk about is I know that some in the media have talked about this, but they labeled the bill the "Don't Say Gay" bill. Why do you think it's being portrayed this way?
Well, because I think otherwise it's common sense. I mean, if you ask people, okay, do you think parents ought to know what their kindergarten children are learning in public schools? Do you think schools ought to be introducing things like sexual orientation or gender identity? Should we be introducing those to first graders without parents' consent? Almost all people are going to say absolutely not. So I think on the other side, the advocates for gender ideology in public schools, they know it's sort of a losing proposition if they describe this accurately. So they have to mislabel it as the so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill, which is, of course, not at all what it's about. It's about the well-being of kids, and it's about the knowledge of parents to be in on what's being taught to their children in elementary schools.
Yeah, and I know that Florida, it's not the only state to address this issue. I guess a series of bills were introduced in the Minnesota State House yesterday to give parents more input in their children's education. And then also in Wisconsin, lawmakers introduced a bill earlier this month to create a parental bill of rights. How significant is this push? And also talk about, you know, what that demonstrates.
Well, I think it's one of the most important things that's happening in 2022. I think this reassertion of parents' rights, and frankly, children's rights, is a really important thing to watch, not just at the national level, but especially at the state level. And so I think that's quite significant. But I don't think anyone should be under any illusions that this is a response to aggressive acts on the other side in terms of inserting these ideas into younger and younger school classrooms. And so this is really a response to that. But I'm optimistic that a lot more states, in addition to Florida, will do something with parents' rights here in the next year.
And Jay, do we know where this bill stands right now in Florida? What's the latest with it?
It's under debate. It's introduced, of course, by Republicans. There's a Republican governor, so if it can pass the legislature, I'm quite certain that Governor DeSantis will sign it. But we're still, you know, awaiting hearings and discussion about it. So the debate is still on. But I'm optimistic that if things continue to go the way they are, that this will be the law in the state of Florida.
We have about 30 seconds left or so, but wondering any advice for parents who maybe are watching this and wondering, you know, what they can do if this is being taught in their schools.
Ask the schools. So go to the school boards, go to the teachers, go to the principals. If your schools or students are in a public school, find out what they're doing about these issues. Find out what they're introducing, any subject, certainly subjects that involve sex and sexual orientation and gender identity. And don't just assume that, well, it's not happening at my school. It's happening in far more schools than people realize.
Absolutely. Well, Jay, thank you so much for your time today. Always appreciate you coming on and definitely speaking with us about this topic.
Pleasure. Good to be with you.
Up next, a preview of the Holy Father's visit to Florence, Italy later this month. And here, kitty, kitty, a high-climbing tale of an adventurous cat at the Vatican. Good news about enrollment in U.S. Catholic schools. The number of students rose by 62,000 during the school year, which ended last June. That is up 3.8% from the year before. It is the first increase in 2 decades and the largest in 50 years. Catholic school commitment to coronavirus safety is considered one of the most important factors. Pope Francis is said to travel to Florence, Italy later this month. The Holy Father will meet bishops and government officials from from that region. They will discuss issues important to the cities and towns near the Mediterranean Sea, including migration. Florence is roughly 170 miles north of Rome. Pope Francis last visited there 7 years ago. EWTN News Rome correspondent Colm Flynn joins us now from Florence. Colm, great to see you. I know that you've been there for a few days now with the crew. Can you set the scene for us and also the significance of where you are?
Well, good evening, Tracy, from a very wet Florence. I'm standing here in Piazza della Signoria, the piazza in front of Palazzo Vecchio, or in English, translated, Old Palace. It's right in the heart of Florence, and inside you'll find an incredible room called Salon de Cinquecento, or the Hall of 500. Now, this is where the 500 members of the Council of the Florentine Republic would meet and make decisions at the end of the 15th century. Tracy, it's a stunning room, and its beauty is hard to put into words, but I know that you can see images of it now on your screen. And it's in this room, under the priceless works of art by Michelangelo and Da Vinci, that Pope Francis will be meeting bishops and mayors from across the Mediterranean region when he visits here later this month.
And Colm, what is the purpose of the Pope's trip, and do you know what the meetings will be about?
Well, the Pope will be here in the Italian city of Florence on Sunday, the 27th, for a number of meetings and appointments with high-ranking officials. Participants will come from 20 countries, with at least 70 bishops and 60 mayors expected to attend. And also, of course, as is the style of Pope Francis, it is expected that he will be meeting refugees and their families to hear their stories and show his and the Church's closeness to them. The Mediterranean Sea has been given names like the liquid graveyard, or the largest graveyard in Europe, as thousands of migrants have drowned making treacherous journeys in overcrowded boats in the hope of a better life here in Europe. In fact, Tracy, it is estimated that 23,000 people have lost their lives since 2014. And Pope Francis himself has called the Mediterranean Mar Mortum, which means the Sea of Death. So he will be asking those officials present what more can be done by the Church, by local authorities, by the states, and by ordinary citizens to save people from dying.
And Colm, before I let you go, I understand that Pope Francis held similar meetings last year where he addressed some of the same issues. What more can you tell us about that?
That's right, Tracy. Pope Francis met with Italian bishops and bishops from the Mediterranean region last year in the city of Bari in the south of Italy. And he spoke then about peaceful coexistence between people from different backgrounds, religions, ethnicities. So this meeting here in Florence is very much seen as a continuation of that conversation. And it could be said, Tracy, that maybe the reason the Pope is paying so much attention to this issue is that one of the great challenges for Pope Francis will be getting all the Mediterranean churches to work together in full cooperation, despite the differences they may have, historical disputes and rifts and so on. Here in Florence, Pope Francis will be urging everyone gathered to put those differences aside and act swiftly together to help save lives and help migrants. Tracy?
All right, Colm, thank you so much. In a rainy but still beautiful Florence, Italy. Thank you for your report.
Good evening, Tracy. Thank you.
All right, turning now to the Olympics. Norway is leading the medal count with 12 golds and 26 total medals. Germany has 9 golds. The U.S. has 7 golds, 6 silvers, and 4 bronze. Austria and the Netherlands round out the top 5. And finally tonight, we're all familiar with how cats climbing up trees, well, they can get stuck. Well, a similar adventure played out earlier today in St. Peter's Square. An orange cat managed to climb up and perch on the famous colonnade which surrounds the square. Vatican firefighters responded, and after a few attempts, well, they accomplished the rescue. Vatican safety officials will try to find the cat's family or find a new and loving home for the little guy. We thank our colleague, Catholic News Agency senior Rome correspondent Hannah Brockhouse for her delightful coverage. Cute. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.